This is my Shockburst weapon swap Merc. I'm currently a Witchhunter. This build should work with Gemling Legionnaire and probably the Ranger specs as well. The build revolves around this Crossbow skill here, Shockburst Rounds. This skill's got one mechanic and two components to it. It's got a projectile component and a pulsing component. The pulse does nearly 5 times the amount of damage for me than the projectile, but the catch with the pulse is it will only trigger when it hits a shocked target. And Shockburst Rounds is actually awful at shocking the target, so we have to look elsewhere to find a way to shock our targets. The best other crossbow skill I found is Voltaic Grenade. That hits quite hard and seems to do a decent job of shocking the target and also building up electrocution. But grenades are a bit finicky. And a more reliable option I found was Stormcaller Arrow. Stormcaller Arrow, much like Shockburst Rounds, has two components, an arrow and a bolt. Pretty much you shoot an arrow into an enemy, and then after a short delay, a bolt will appear, which will do a bit of AoE damage, and has an 800% more chance to shock, which means it will nearly shock every time. Another skill that probably could work if you find out how to fit it in is Ball Lightning, which has a 750% more chance to shock, but 133 int to get on a Merc is kind of difficult. So, crux is you shoot in Stormcaller Arrow, 1.5 seconds later, the bolt will go off, your target will be shocked. Then when you shoot the target with Stormburst Rounds, you'll get that pulse, which will do the majority of your damage. Other gems you'll be using as well, Voltaic Mark. So it is also a bow skill. Hits against the mark target have a 50% more chance to be shocked, and shock has a 30% increased effect on the mark target, which is better, just increased chance of shock. Herald of Thunder, which is when you kill a shocked target, your next couple of attacks, next 3 I believe, so next few attacks, will have a little effect on it, and that's really nice. Electrocuting Arrow, neither Shockburst Rounds nor Stormcaller Arrow build up the electrocution effect on the target you're damaging, but if you hit a target with Electrocuting Arrow, it allows lightning damage to actually build up electrocution, which is nice, and it's mainly just used against like big tanky elites and like bosses. Shard Scavenger is essentially just like an instant reload on your Shockburst Rounds after you consume a shock. I don't believe there's anything that directly states in this build that it consumes shock. I feel like sometimes it does go off though. I don't know what exact interaction causes that, but I'm running it just because I've got the spare 30 spirit. Now the skill tree. This is currently where I have the skill tree now. I'll have linked the sort of endgame skill tree, which is this one here. Just to say, I believe this is heavily unoptimized as the game is so new. There are definitely more optimal paths and ways to min-max, but obviously that'll take a lot of time. But I'll try my best to explain my thought process behind why I've gone the way I've gone. So we will actually use a new system that's put into Path of Exile 2, which are weapon set skill points. And what weapon set skill points are, it's a skill point that can occupy pretty much 2 different spots on the skill tree, depending on what weapon you're using. So for us, we'll have our bow skills and our bow weapon set occupy ailment and shock skill points that we don't need on our crossbow, because Shockburst Rounds does an awful job of shocking the target, but Stormcaller Arrow does. And so if our Shockburst Rounds is never applying ailments or applying shock, we don't need our skill points. We don't need our skill points for ailments to affect our crossbow skill. And much the same with like crossbow reload, that would work for our crossbow weapon set, because obviously as a bow, crossbow reload does nothing. And same as with crossbow damage. So essentially that's how those weapon sets are split. The ailment ones for the bow, and crossbow reload and crossbow damage for the crossbow. Leveling up, this is roughly the path you'll be taking. Starting off with projectile damage and attack speed. Attack speed's quite helpful because obviously the more rapidly you can shoot out your Shockburst rounds the more often you pulse, which is great. Just down here, and the first sort of major points you want to get are weapon swap speed. Obviously, swapping between the crossbow and the bow, you want it to be quite quick. And crossbow reload, this instant reload node right here. It is definitely quite noticeable if you have like a really long reload between crossbow, and you can see here it's like nearly instant for me. I hardly stop when just auto firing the crossbow. Over to this next point here where we get some elemental damage. We get this point here, which is a chance to increase chance to shock, which could possibly be, I do that, not the crossbow. If I have the weapon set as a crossbow, I'll apply that as the chance to shock as the bow side of things. And we'll come down to these lightning nodes here, and we'll pick up lightning rod. So at this point, I don't know if crit is the way to go or not, but as a lightning bow without crit, having lightning rod here I think is pretty big. And what it reads as is lightning damage with non-critical hits is lucky. And what lucky means is that for the damage that would occur, it is rolled twice and the better result is used. And lightning damage has a pretty high range, so that I feel like is pretty clutch for the build. And that's sort of like the sort of start. From that point there, we'd carry on down to this dual socket point, get polymathy and jack of all trades, which is some good all stats and does a fair amount of bonus damage for you based on your low stat, which is probably in for me. You'd run across here, and then you'd get the weapon set skill points in the crossbow, get some weapon set skill points in, so we go across here with the normal ones, and then to the ailments, you get weapon set skill points into bow, and then we'd head across normal to these nodes here, which are really good. These are like essentially bonus damage nodes against rare and unique enemies, which are by far the meatiest in the game at the moment. From that point onwards, I'd continue on to around here. Obviously with these little nodes, as you need dex, as you need strength, or as you need in whatever stat you need, you'd pop it in. These points all here would be weapon set for your bow. Then back to normal, carry on, get the next dual socket. We've got some elemental damage with attacks here, which you can pick up. Evasion, more move speed. Move speed's always great. Lightning pen, lightning damage, which is also really good. Next dual socket, increase attack speed, and then that there. What else am I missing? We've got some projectile points here, and essentially that's about it, and then you'll end up at roughly where this endgame skill tree is here, but that's my thought process behind those. Next up, the skill gems. So with Shockburst Rounds, I have gone with Martial Tempo, Primal Armament, and Fresh Clip.
What you have there is not clips. These are mags.
Stormcaller Arrow, I'm using Coursing Current, Scattershot, and Conduction. Now, with Conduction, it can be replaced with Lasting Shock. Now, for the entirety of the campaign, I was using Lasting Shock. There are points where having Conduction is better because you may run into some mobs which don't seem to shock as fast as you would like, but generally against most bosses, you'd want to have Lasting Shock just so you don't have to reapply your Stormcaller Arrow as often. But where I am in maps, I haven't run into many bosses at up to tier 2. I'm finding Conduction to be a bit better just to guarantee that shock a little bit faster. For Voltaic Mark, we're using Persistence so it lasts longer, and Lightning Mastery just so I had something to put in. Herald of Thunder, I'm using Magnified Effect and Neural Overload, and Electrocuting Arrow, I'm using Maim Support and Lightning Infusion. These ones are just honestly whatever you want. I feel like these, of the options, these are the highest damage options for Shockbursting Round. And these are the best options for Stormcaller Arrow. But, you know, nothing's going to stop you from messing around with it and giving it a go yourself. So I'd definitely encourage that. With the gear as well, movement speed on boots is BIS. Physical damage on your crossbow is BIS, because obviously these spells here, and they've got a pretty good conversion. So on the, if I can bring it up, where is it here? Yeah. So the projectile says it converts 40%, but the pulse, which does the majority of the damage, converts 100% of the physical damage to lightning. So obviously, if we have big fizz on our crossbow and bow, that is big damage for us. Attack speed's always great as well. And then it's scuffed getting good gear in POE 2. I think, as we all know, it's really hard to get resistances, get life and resistances wherever you can. And that's the best way to go. Definitely want movement speed on the boots. You will be kiting. As mobs are chasing you, you'll be running back and then shooting your crossbow, running back, getting them electrocuted, shooting your crossbow. That will be the best point to go. Also against bosses or like heavy elites, ideally what you'll be doing is using Electrocuting Arrow. So as I said earlier, this allows our lightning damage to build up electrocution, which is sort of like a CC effect. Lightning damage by default doesn't have it unless the skill specifies it, and that's something electrocution reads. So our way of introducing that into our build is with Electrocuting Arrow. So you're Electrocuting Arrow, and then you'll mark the target, and then you'd shoot your Stormcaller Arrow into it, maybe like 1 or 2, and then hopefully by then, as those pulses go off, it's shocked, and then you can unload your crossbow into it. And you should absolutely be pumping the boss or the elite by then. Versus mobs, you generally don't have to worry about Electrocuting Arrow. They don't live long enough, generally, from what I've found so far, and even into the start of Endgame. I'm only just starting maps. Voltaic Mark as well, you can use it, but most of the time, yeah, towards the end of the cruel campaign and in maps with just like even your magic monsters and your white monsters, just doing Stormcaller Arrow into Shockburst Rounds is plenty to dispatch them. As far as endgame goes, I'm only up to tier 2 maps at the moment, so I could possibly report back to see how it goes. But as far as clearing the campaign goes, absolutely melted the campaign. All the bosses, which for me I felt to be the most difficult part starting off, dealing with the bosses. The mobs weren't too bad, but it took absolutely forever to kill the bosses. This build's got absolutely no problem with that, and I think you should find it will absolutely melt them too. So if you've got any questions, let me know. I'll be reading the comments and I'll try my best to answer. And I appreciate it.